I'm sure we'll discuss more, have a very US-centric view of how things are done. And I've tried reading a few of those also on personal finance, and the way they talk about debt and expenses. हमारे तो मतलब we never had those kind of problems, or we never discussed those ways of living in our house. Ki we live in credit card debt, and we survive on loans. And I mean, I swear, some of the books I read, the first 3 or 4 chapters are purely about, please don't do these expenses, please don't spend more than you have, please don't go to credit.
Welcome to a new episode of Chaipekharcha. Firstly, it's just me and Ishan today, uh, and we are going to do an experiment. So I don't know if a lot of you have seen Tim Ferriss or heard Tim Ferriss's podcast, uh, but he does something peculiar that we will try to replicate. So he generally has a very standard podcast format, जहाँ पे guest आते हैं and he asks questions, and that's how he intends the listeners will learn. But every now and then he does something called as a random show. So he calls a friend and then talks about random topics which are unlinked to each other. Uh, and we thought we'll also try this. So we'll of course keep it within the bounds of personal finance or finance in general. Link topics nahi rakhenge. We'll keep it random. So Ishan, you ready for it?
Absolutely excited.
Perfect. सही है फिर. Okay, so let's start with books. We keep talking about what are your favorite books in personal finance or finance. Let's start with that. So आप एक बताओ. Give your top book recommendation that you have liked a lot, and then I'll follow with mine.
One that I liked the most was Dhandho Investor by Monish Babrai.
Okay. Quick summary.
So Dhandho Investor is basically a summary of how he likes to invest, very briefly stating the fact that his core principle of investment is heads I win a lot, tails I lose very little, right? So it is always about finding those opportunities जहाँ पे नुकसान minimized है, पर अगर profit हुआ तो काफी हो सकता है. And he derives that dhando obviously is a Gujarati term for how businessmen in Gujarat do operate, and that's why they are some of the wealthiest people in our country. So he gives a lot of, and the reason I loved the book was the way it flows, and the way he tells the story, and the way he brings in principles of investments is very well put and very Indianized in a way. You can relate to it. बहुत सारी investment books, I'm sure we'll discuss more, have a very US-centric view of how things are done. And I've tried reading a few of those also on personal finance, and the way they talk about debt and expenses. हमारे तो मतलब we never had those kind of problems, or we never discussed those ways of living in our house. Ki we live in credit card debt, and we survive on loans. And I mean, I swear, some of the books I read, the first 3 or 4 chapters are purely about, please don't do these expenses, please don't spend more than you have, please don't go into credit cards. So it didn't relate as much. But the way he told the story about how the Patels moved from India to a lot of countries in Africa initially, and then the Uganda crisis happens, and they were suddenly without a country, and some of them managed to move to the US, and how they took over the motel business there, starting off with one investment of $5,000 by one family who basically put whatever they had into buying a motel, because at that time motels were running out of business. And they said, if we can do this, if it works, I will have a lot of money. If it doesn't, when the market turns, which they expected, I'll at least be able to resell it again at a small profit, or at the same price, right? So basically, their entire idea was, I'm getting this piece of real estate for a very cheap price, and I'm going to either make it work, or even if it doesn't work, I don't lose much of the head I take, the head I win, stays I lose way later. That's where he derives the concept from. His point is, this is how they do all their businesses. He just takes that example and keeps bringing it back over and over again in the book. which was, I mean, it was excellent to read and just learn from. I wish we had these insights a while back. We could have bought some businesses. And that's kind of how he does his business, his investments, even in the stock market. He tries and finds these companies where there is huge potential to grow, or they are very severely undervalued with huge potential to get to value, but not as much downside when he's investing. So I think that is a great book to learn from. The one that I'm reading right now, sorry, I'm putting into the one that I'm reading
हाँ, नहीं
right
नहीं
now
बताओ.
by another Indian author is The Joys of Compounding by Gautam Bed. He's he's someone who I think I relate to the most in terms of how I at least I hope I can become as successful as uh, he has. So he's someone who moved to the US, and he actually worked the night shift in a hotel at the reception because he wasn't able to initially find a job. Or उस time पे he said I used to consume a lot of blogs and consume a lot of books. So I spent a lot of time, I think 18 months, I'm not sure. I heard this in an interview of his. Just reading, basically just getting familiar with the concepts and learning from people. And then he got lucky and he landed a job as a portfolio manager for a fund that was looking for someone who was familiar with India. So उनको इंडियन मिला, उनने कहा अरे तुम्हें इंडिया पता है, आ जाओ. That happened for him. And there he learned, and now he started launched his own funds. But again, the book is it's very simply put, like it's very very simple language explaining stuff. He kind of repeats a lot of the same philosophies that you would have heard of.
क्या
And
नाम है सर? एक बार बताओ फिर से.
the
ये
joy
किताब का second.
the joys of compounding.
Joys of Compound.
So I think it's a very easy read book, very simple stuff that he puts. He'll keep throwing these nuggets where quotable stuff that you can simply use that quote in places. I think he's deliberately put them there, knowing कि ये वाली चीज उठेगी and people will start posting it in places. So he talks about a lot of good stuff, including how you and compounding. Obviously, the way everyone talks about it needs to happen over time. Everything has to be long term. Don't look for that quick, making a quick buck kind of thing. Oh, it never ends up working out. And I mean, I'm still going through it. So, but it's seeming like a good read. It's not in the story format that Dhando Investor is, but it still seems like a good read.
Got it. सही है सर. धंधो वाला मैंने I had started. The second one I have not read, which I have to read. Good suggestion. For me, and we were talking about it before recording. Uh, I have read a lot of finance related books, but the one that probably because it's the most recent comes top of mind is Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I think a lot of people must have read it. Simply है उसका. He's not talking about anything that's out of the world or rocket science. Most of the things he says we all know.
Yeah.
वही जो आपने बताया ना, don't go into credit card debt or लोन ले रहे हो तो सोच के लो ये सब. But he phrases it well. और something that's ये ना मेरे एक अच्छे दोस्त who's also advisor, financial advisor told me 95% of all finance is behavioral. 5% is only calculation or 95% में आप how you behave and how the market behaves just dictates how the money moves around the world. And because he's highlighting the behavioral aspect of it, बढ़िया लगे मेरे को book. I recommend it highly.
Yeah,
It's a
and
small, short read also.
the thing that I appreciate about him is whenever you hear him talk, he's very clear he's a passive investor, right? He's someone who's
Yes,
writing books about finance, and he's very clear that I'm a passive investor. I only do index funds, एक आध stock here and there, but mostly index funds, and purely for
correct,
the reason that I don't trust myself in doing
correct.
everything perfectly. So
जबकि वो खुद फाइनेंस के बारे में यानी प्रोफेशनली भी लिखता है apart
I
from
know,
the book.
so, and that's where I think his books are, and he's obviously a bestseller author. So I think one of the reasons why his books are successful is he writes from the psychological aspect of it, not the money aspect of it, because he realizes wahan par is where most people fail. And even the books that I mentioned, if you go through them, you'll realize they all speak about the fact that it's not maths that gets you there. It's not going to be how well you can calculate and value and do all of these. It's your control over your emotions, your control over your
Patience.
behavior that gets you there. So I'll give you. I mean, I probably won't name stocks because then we go
Ah,
down a bad spiral. But
ah,
Issal earlier this year, I had a couple of stocks where I made decent money. Like I made 40% return on two stocks I'm talking about.
okay.
And
Okay.
I'd held them for about a year, more than a year.
Ah,
I'd have more than a year. So I made 40%. I was like, okay, I don't know, market seems dicey. I probably should just get out of it. But and if I had held on, even during these choppy times of the last year, both those stocks have doubled in price. So I feel like, and the stocks that I have held on to have not done so well. So you don't sell your winners.
I
Uh,
know the stock, sir. I think I know the stock.
the ones that haven't done well, we've discussed before. Uh, but
Yeah.
no, but it's very it's very hard to, even when you know all these principles, even when you know exactly how you're supposed to
Oh
behave,
yeah.
to actually do it is very very difficult. Which is why I feel like SIPs are good because they take that power out
Useful.
of your hand. You are
Correct.
quietly
Correct.
investing in something, and even, I mean, SIPs obviously are mutual funds. Even if you have very strong belief in some stocks and you want to put money in there, I think you should do exactly the same thing. You should keep putting some money in them every month until you have
And
that
forget all.
faith key. Until you have that faith, don't worry about where it's going up and down. Give it time. If it is a good company and it lost like for 50% of its value at one point, but I was like, "Nee, I know this
Right.
company is fine, it'll come back." It did. It gave me a 40% return on that. Right now
Right.
it is double that. So if you had held on to it and you knew the company was good and you were holding on to it and putting money in, you would have probably made a lot of money even doing that and stuff. But that is the problem. Stocks has almost become like a game where people see that
Right.
chart going up and down. They're like, when will I enter? And it'll go up at exactly that point. So like, that is why it's
Very
hard to
agree.
control that behavior.
Yeah, absolutely say it. Okay. Let's move on to our second random topic now. And we'll keep the same theme as what we've learned from books. Give one good advice that you've received from your parents or your friends, anyone close to you, which you have held on to on personal finance, of course.
I think best advice that I've got, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, something I wouldn't do is, uh, this is something my mother says in very typical fashion, jitni chadar utna hi pair phelo.
Yeah,
So you never go out of your limitations when it comes to spending money, right? And that this is the reason why credit card debt does not make any sense to me. If I'm using credit card, I do use credit cards. I have worked with credit cards, so I like the instrument. I know there are benefits to the instrument. I know there can be severe consequences if you misuse the instrument, but it is effectively a mode of payment, right? You're just using it to pay for something, but you can get rewards. For example, you can get cash back, which are all benefits of using that. But
correct.
I have never gone into, I will revolve on the credit card and I will not make a full payment. I will only spend as much as I can afford to spend. So I am simply using that instead of cash as another mode of payment. I know banks hate people like me, but I think that's the ideal way of using that. It gives you some time to pay back the whole thing from cash because you get a 30-day window to make a payment. But I would never go spending way too much because I feel like the card has that limit. And I mean, and that's the reason why banks would give your credit card 3x, 4x your annual income ka limit, because they want you to overspend. They want you to feel like you
Yeah,
have the money to spend. But my parents still don't own credit cards. This is after both me and my brother have worked at banks. Both of us have credit
right.
cards. Both of us have insisted they take credit cards. Gotten them add-on cards issued, and those add-on cards are lying in lockers. So it is quite silly when we sometimes see that behavior, but I think it comes from the same fact that if I don't want to even start that, because I don't want to get the feeling that this is free, easy money, free money. I can use this, because it is not.
Right.
So
Right.
that I think is great advice.
No, I agree. I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely good advice. मेरे लिए sir, this is one advice that my father uh, keeps giving specifically in stock investing. वो बोलते हैं कि, and I don't know if it always works, but that's his stance and I followed it and it worked for me. कि जब अगर आपने कोई स्टॉक खरीदा है and if it doubles in value, irrespective of whatever your belief is, वो कि ऊपर जाएगा कि रहेगा नीचे जाएगा, you just sell half of it and get out your principal investment. तो वो ताकि you start thinking about it as it's free stock. And then you can keep it and you'll not be desperate कि अगर कभी ऊपर नीचे गया तो you'll not panic and sell.
Yeah.
Which is yeah, it's worked for me. But I know there are theories against it also.
So there's two schools of thought here. What your father says is exactly what Ashwath Damodharan says, the professor of
Okay.
valuation at Stern
Acha,
in New York.
I didn't know that.
So he says when I invest and when a stock reaches a certain level where he doesn't say double, but he's like if it multiplies to a certain value, and I'm like, oh my god, now it is reaching that point where I thought I would sell, but market is going crazy and it is going really high. I don't sell all of it. I will sell
Right.
most of it, but keep a little investment in it, so I don't feel that pinch that just like I am feeling right now. I sold at 40% profit. I could have kept a little,
Right.
and it would have doubled. But he says I
Right.
still feel like, oh, I still own a part of that stock if it goes up, if the market craziness continues. But even if it
Right.
goes down, I have made most. So he gave that example with Nvidia that he
Ah,
had bought
acha.
Nvidia and he kept Nvidia, and when it
Yeah.
reached a certain level where his principles don't allow him to hold anymore, he said I sold most of it, but not all of it. So that way, when the crazy rally continued happening, I didn't feel the pinch saying, "Oh, I could have made more money." I'm still making a
When
little
I
more, but I also
mm,
when it crashes, I will not feel the pinch that, "Oh my god, it crashed." What Pabrai again? I don't think he says it in Thando. He says it in some of his interviews. He says when I buy a stock, the expectation I have a value in mind. But
right.
if a stock doubles within, I think he says 3 years, I sell it. And if it gains 50% in the first year itself, I sell it. Because if it is
Yeah.
behaving that quickly, if something is going up that quickly, then either the market has completely flipped its opinion on that
Mm,
stock or something else is driving it. And I don't want to be at the receiving end when things change again. So
acha.
his point is कि एक बार when the market starts behaving crazy,
Ah,
obviously take the benefit for a while, but then you also want to get out of it unless you see, and that's where he talks about reevaluating your investment thesis every few months. So, for example, if it's gained 50% in 6 months, then you can reevaluate saying is this 50% genuinely because the market is correcting, or is it because किसी ने देखा कि Monish Pabrai bought the stock, everyone is now buying the stock. So you need
right.
to then be like, there's no point holding on to this. I've gotten enough return already pretty quickly. So his time horizon generally is 3 years where he's looking to achieve that doubling of value. So if that happens anytime he sells it, and if it's 50%, I think in the first 6 months, then he sells it. That's his way of looking at it.
Topic number 3, and this is more trivial, but might be interesting to learn about from either side. Um, so how do you look at non-major expenses, but reasonably above day-to-day expenses? Things like buying high-tech electronic equipment, yeah, for things like even buying kitchen appliances and so on. As NRIs, we have uh, that privilege and flexibility कि अब इंडिया से खरीद सकते हैं या फिर जहाँ रह रहे हैं वहां से खरीद सकते हैं, इन दोनों के केस में सिंगापुर से, एंड मोर ऑफन देन नॉट इंडिया का सस्ता ही होता है, बट देन यू हैव द दिक्कत कि भाई उठा के लेकर आना पड़ेगा और फिर कब ट्रिप लगेगी तब तब जाएंगे, इमीडिएटली नहीं मिलेगा, थिंग्स लाइक दैट. हाउ डू यू see that way of getting those things?
I would generally put convenience over anything else.
Okay.
If you have the money, unless it is a genuinely high value purchase, but then I feel like uske andar, I'm sure customs and duty will come in. Why go through that
Ah,
hassle?
correct.
If it's a thing which I can get here, and obviously I'll do the research here. I will not just buy from the first place I see it.
Ah,
But I wouldn't consider going back to India and picking something up unless I am in India and I see something. I'm like, oh, I need this back home. and obviously it's
Okay.
cheaper here, so I can pick it and take it back. Or I know I have a trip coming up, and I'll pick it up there, or I'll buy it on one of
Yeah.
the e-commerce websites and then ship it home because I'll be going home and I can pick it up. But that is only if I know कि India trip होने वाला है. If I am in Singapore in general, कुछ purchase है, even if it's a slightly bigger purchase, I'd prefer to do it वहाँ पर because I just feel like it's more convenient to do it. And किस लिए कमा रहे हैं पैसा अगर यहाँ पे भी नहीं खर्च सकते तो.
It's okay. नहीं, सही बात. मेरा थोड़ा अलग है सर. मैं ना पहले आपके जैसे ही था, एज इन कन्वीनियंस ओवर एनीथिंग एल्स, बट नाउ आई एम, एंड इट ऑफ कोर्स डिपेंड्स ऑन द प्रोडक्ट की बात कर रहे हैं, बट नाउ आई सी more and more, see myself more and more buying from India and getting it here. A function of my frequency of visits also to India. But in general also, even small things like अपना I prefer अपने जो घर के मसाले वगैरह रहते हैं वो यहाँ भी मिलते हैं बहुत सारे, पर इंडिया में फिर आपको चक्की वगैरह वाले मिल जाते हैं. Trivial things, but then you start preferring कि
You get it from a place you trust also.
getting, हाँ, getting it from a place you trust, क्योंकि a lot of them do come from India only. Eventually वो
हाँ.
ship होके कहीं से आते हैं. पर हाँ, it's a tricky thing, especially in electronics, क्योंकि इलेक्ट्रॉनिक में कभी भी बहुत डिफरेंस हो जाता है.
Yeah, and I think electronics and the size also
30%
matters. If you're bringing a huge ass
साइज.
thing, so then it's very
करेक्ट.
hard to make it travel also with you. रास्ते में टूट जाएगा
करेक्ट.
वो.
करेक्ट. तो वही, हाँ, इट डिपेंड्स ऑन द प्रोडक्ट. राइट. ठीक है. ठीक है सर. आई थिंक random topics, I have run out of things to randomly talk about. आपके पास कोई और आइडिया हो तो बताइए, बात करते हैं.
नहीं, मैंने ऐसा कुछ सोच नहीं रखा अभी.
ठीक है. Then we'll close out this episode here. Thank you for listening to this episode. What we definitely like on this episode is this was totally unscripted. यानी हमने सोचा भी नहीं था कि कौन से टॉपिक के बारे में बात करेंगे. पर do let us know how you felt about this episode, and we can maybe prepare better. If you like the format, we can prepare better next time with some topics to talk about, and it might go into more deeper, better conversations the next time. Nonetheless, thank you for joining in as always, and we look forward to see you again in the next episode.